Eno Sarris of The Athletic joins us to talk about roster construction in snake drafts, KDS, projections, Command Plus, and more on the premiere episode of Beat the Shift. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
Doing fantastic. A bit of snow here in New York. Nice time to talk about baseball. How are you doing up there in upstate New York?
Got a lot of snow, but thinking about baseball keeps us thinking warm, and hopefully the snow will melt away pretty quick.
Yeah. Well, we're really excited for our very first episode here on Fangraphs, and I couldn't think of a better guest to have on. He writes for The Athletic. He is the host of the Rates and Barrels podcast, and personally, he was instrumental in getting me to Fangraphs and getting the ATC projections up on Fangraphs. Welcome, Eno Sarris. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me on, and congrats for being on Fangraphs. That was my big break as well as running the fantasy section there back in the day. Left it in good hands with Paul Sporer, but I'm glad to see you're there. Glad to see your projections are on there. Between your projections and the bat, those are the two that I follow the most. In any sort of preseason preparation work that I do, I have those two as columns in my Excel sheet. So thanks for doing what you do.
Oh, very welcome. And we'll talk a little bit more about the ATC projections a little bit later in the show. But we're going to talk about in our strategy section to start off a little bit about roster construction in rotisserie snake drafts. So, when you're doing your picks in regular roto snake draft, the question always comes up, what matters to you more? Is it picking a player to gain value, or is it making sure that you have a category balance? Now, both are important, but which one do you might put more attention to?
I was just reading a piece by Mike Gianella on Baseball Prospectus, and you can win on value, and I think in the past I've focused on value, and you can win on value and just destroy home runs and RBI, and destroy a couple categories and not have a well-balanced team. So I think just focusing only on value can leave you with an unbalanced team. And then, depending on trades in the future, first of all, there's not every format allows trades. And then sort of depending on other people to give you good value when they know you have way too many homers or whatever it is, is kind of folly. So I was trying not to be wishy-washy. I saw this on the rundown, and this is my answer. In the early rounds, the very first 2 or 3 rounds, I want value and category goodness. I want sort of 5 category value. I will go for value after that for the mid rounds. And then the late rounds are for, I don't want to say flyers, but they're for category need. I will go, if I feel like I didn't get a great starting second baseman, I'll go get Gavin Lux or something. I'll go get Nick Solak. I'll go get someone that isn't my starting second baseman, but could be my starting second baseman. And so I guess my answer is, at the beginning, I want both value and need. Then I'll go for value for a while, and then I'll go for need.
All right. Ruvain, any thoughts?
I think value early, because that's where you can get most of your accounting stats, and then you can get the balance more, just like Eno said, toward the middle rounds. I wouldn't sacrifice value early for balance, but you don't want to be too unbalanced early either. But I think if you see a player there that just is an outlier, he's like no one's taking him, and you feel that his value is really up there, and he just keeps sliding, I think you have to grab that player and just you'll figure out the balance later on. It's a matter of having as much value early and then balancing later.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead,
just to jump in, I think an important thing that just occurred to me listening to Ruben was that util only guys, like Nelson Cruz in particular, but then there's a lot of DH only guys in the past that have been really undervalued. And in the middle rounds, you might say, well, he doesn't fit. I can't play him anywhere. He'll clog up my util. You got to take him,
David
because
Ortiz.
David
In the
Ortiz.
day.
You take all those numbers, and then later, if you need to take a fifth or sixth outfielder, like an extra outfielder, just load up your bench with the needs that you have, right, and still have that big bat where you have him. So, yeah, I totally agree on value early.
Yeah, I mean that's also the question of positional balance, not also statistical balance. I mean the thing is that, to me it's value the whole way, especially in shallower leagues, especially in leagues where you can trade. Unless you're in a deep mono league format, really value the whole way, even towards the end, because you're going to be able to pick up players on the waiver wire. Someone's going to get hurt on your squad, and you can always fill in some missing statistics from that. I mean, if you're picking value, it means you're covering most of the categories. You could be deficient in a stolen base category.
Yes,
but
it's
again,
going to be stolen bases, man. Everyone overvalues stolen bases,
Yeah,
I mean,
you're right,
because
but
they keep going away.
Right. But you could pick it up if you need to very low down, right? You might not be able to get the strength of the stolen bases early, and you might find that you're better off taking the value earlier and banking the power. So you'll be very strong in homers. But in terms of the stolen base, you can pick some stuff off the waiver wire. It's okay to be slightly deficient in a category as long as you have built up that bank of value.
I don't know. The one thing I'll just say is, depending on a trade, man, you get to the trade table and they say you're way out in front in homers. They don't mean anything to you. I want you to give me like 2 huge homer guys for Malik Smith, and you kind of want to just leave the table. Also, even leagues where they allow trading doesn't mean that there's a consistent level of willingness to trade or investment in the league where everyone's at the table. So, a lot of times you can go to a league and be like, okay, there's 3 guys or 3 teams that are willing to trade with me. Like 3 teams that seem active enough, and those 3 teams don't have stolen bases, so I'm screwed. So, I will go to balance at some point. I will start drafting for need at some point in the thing. But I agree with you guys that it should be later. And I value your input on sort of value all the way through. But if there's a shot I can take, take that waiver wire shot early. You're talking about picking up stolen bases on the waiver wire. Why not put that waiver wire pick on your bench?
Right. Two things to add though. If you're in a league with an overall prize like the NFBC main event, then you have to tilt a lot more towards the statistical balance, because you're not going to beat 1,000 people. And there's no trading in that league also. So that's an extreme example of where you have to pay attention there. The other thing I'd say is that when I draft, you can't ignore statistics. I have a couple of metrics available to me. Here's the top most valuable players. Here's players that I think that are where it's a big drop in each position. I know that I have to take a shortstop where there's going to be a huge drop. But I'll also have what I call is an uncorrelated metric. I'm going to bubble up to the top the 10 players who are within range of value who will most balance my portfolio. So if I'm low in steals, it'll show up a steals guy even more. If I'm low in average, it'll probably show a high batting average player a little bit more, just so that I get my mind, okay, if I'm going to take a guy for value, tilt it a little bit more towards balancing my portfolio. That's a little bit more advanced, but it's something that you should be thinking about.
And the key word you said, it was within range of value, because if you start reaching too much, then you're going to lose value on the pick, and then it's just not worth it.
Yeah, I would not reach for. You can't reach all that much for statistics. You got to stick within range of some value. Now, question: are you looking for when it comes to your pick in a draft? Stability or upside, and what constitutes stability and upside in your opinion?
I had a labor squad one year where my average age was like 24. And I've looked at the relationship between age and on the field success for a major league for just like non-fantasy reasons. And what I keep finding is that it's like 27 and 28. And that's a little bit weird of a number because when we do aging curves, we kind of decide that the peak age is 26 probably. And if it's not 26, it's 26, 27. It's not 27, 28, 29, you know? And the thought process that I kind of underwent over a couple of years, and AL Labor has been really one of the most instructive leagues for me in terms of just teaching me how to be better and putting me in the best competition, was that I was too young. You know, I had too many young guys that weren't established and didn't do what I thought they would do, and didn't do that well. So I try not to be wishy-washy, but I think you kind of want to have what you would call "quote unquote" upside, and I think it's a little bit like that sort of positional need question where I'd rather have established players, especially at the beginning when I'm spending so much draft capital. I'd rather not bank on some sort of progression that isn't necessarily there. Think about Vlad Guerrero. We've been waiting for Vlad Guerrero to break out. The price now matches finally a point where maybe you can buy him this year at the price where you will gain from his breaking out. But you can't buy at the breakout. You know what I mean? You can't say, I think Vlad Guerrero, who has never hit 30 homers, is going to hit 30 homers this year, so therefore I will pay for 30 homers. You know what I mean?
Right.
So there's a relationship between established talent on your team and some breakout talent. I'm a believer in projections. However, I will say that I think the biggest weakness in projections is the player who does not have the established major league track record. And
Sure.
you could just not buy any of those. That is a stance. However, I think you can really benefit if you buy smartly, usually towards the bench rounds, usually in the single dollar values in AL onlys, and just buy a couple guys. Like I bought Kyle Lewis last year in AL Labor for $2. The StatCast numbers were there for him. There was a tiny bit of track record. There was a little bit of prospect pedigree, but there was also just the idea that he has an opportunity to play. He only cost $2, and I got a Rookie of the Year for $2. So, you know, you cannot eschew all upside just for established talent. I think you have to just be sort of cautiously optimistic at certain points and make sure you don't spend too much on it.
A lot of good points there. Ruvain, do you differ at all?
Not really. I mean, that age range that you mentioned, between the 27, 26, 27, when they're peaking, that's about the time when all these players hit free agency, and that's usually the year after they have a career year. Look at Anthony Rendon. Look at Trevor Bauer, just had a career year. All these players just had career years, and it's exactly that age. Now, if you want to win your league, if you're trying to get the overall prize, let's say you're going for NFBC, and you want to go for the overall prize, then 100% try to get as many upside players, because one of them may hit or probably will hit, and then you're going to do well. But if you want to be consistent, you want to try to win just your league, or you just a home league, and want to just win your home league, stability is the best thing. You get the proven players, you get the players who have less injury risk. Even, it's so hard to say, there's this one guy that I have to have, and that guy will give me stability. And if he does that for you, that's great. But when it comes to rookies that you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, Luis Robert last year, what was he going to do?
He was amazing at first, and then
he came back to earth. But the whole thing is that he was projected to do this. He didn't hit it, and now for that same reason, he's not going to be. He may not be a first rounder this year, but for that reason, Fernando Tatis Jr. hit that, and now I see him going number 1 in some drafts. I mean, that's crazy. You're not going to get any value out of that. There's no upside. If you're picking Fernando Tatis Jr. 1 or 2, there's no upside with that. Okay, it just doesn't work. When it comes to building a stable team, a team that's going to be competitive all year, you have to have these stable guys. Yes, upside, but with the upside, there's always risk.
So I'll say this. The standard answer that most people give for this is that, in your first couple of rounds, you want stability, you want low-risk players, you're concentrating on players with a high floor. Look at the 30th percentile, 40th percentile. And towards later in the draft, you want to get the high upside guys, 80th, 90th percentile expectations, that kind of thing. I actually don't believe that. I shouldn't say believe entirely. I think stability is a much, much bigger thing that should be concentrated on even later in the drafts. And I'll give you a little bit of a story parable. For those of you who play NCAA pools, the March Madness pools, where you make your pick for each round, 1 seed versus 16 seed, 2 versus 15, and so on and so forth. Um, what I tend to do, and I've won a couple of my office pools, is I pick the Final Four, whoever I think is going to be the Final Four. I'm a UNC fan, so I'll pick there. And then I will pick every favorite in every single game, period. Like every favorite the whole way through. And I found that it works because you're not going to win a Final Four. You're not going to win a whole tournament unless you get the Final Four right. And once you get the Final Four right, your highest probability of getting the most points is just going with favorites. There's no need to fool around with everything. So that's why I do that. So the analogy for baseball is that if you have players lower down, take a guy like Eric Hosmer. He's usually going for $2 to $4 in auctions, low rounds, but he always returns some kind of $10 production. How about Starlin Castro, player like that? Nobody thinks of him. He's a last player on a bench, but he comes up and he earns $10 profit. If you earn that $6 profit on all of your late rounds because you're picking stable players, in order to win your league, which you would have to do anyways, you'll get a waiver wire player that jumps up into the $20 player. Or you'll get another pick, which you had for $15, and they'll jump up to first round. But you need enough of those stable players, even low down, to earn enough money so that when you hit, you can have a base plus all that upside. And so for that reason, I think that stability is much bigger than upside all the way through. Thoughts, Eno?
No, I hear that, and it is especially alluring to hear that for someone who plays in mono leagues and deep leagues, because one of the things that I do the most often, even in a dynasty league, especially in a dynasty league, you'll find those Starlin Castro types for really cheap on the waiver in the late draft, and nobody wants them because they're too old, they're too boring, they don't have that upside. And you can really solidify a bench or the back end of your rotation or the back end of your outfield or whatever. You can really do a lot of damage by just picking a proven commodity. The one thing I think about, though, is that, and I often default to Dynasty because I play that, but I also think about NFBC, which is if you look at where Major League players come from, they come from a lot of different rounds. If you look at bust rates for prospects, the bust rates even on a first round prospect are 40+%.
Yep.
So a lot of times in dynasties, I'll take that information and say, oh, the bust rate is so high on prospects are to be faded, they are to be traded, they are to I should trade these prospects for that usable 29-year-old 30-year-old because that's a better deal because half of those prospects fade. The flip side of this coin, though, is that if you look at the top players in the game, they were all top prospects. I mean, a lot of the potential goes right into the top. So if you look at Bryce Harper, Manny Machado, like all these guys, they were top prospects. And so what you'll find is that you can find a lot of Justin Turners, but you may not find a lot of Mike Trouts. You know what I mean?
Right.
And in certain leagues, you can win a mono league. You can win an AL only league with a bunch of Justin Turners. You can win an NL only. You can't win an AL only league or not yet, but you can win an NL only league with a lot of Justin Turners. But if you're talking about winning the overall prize at NFBC, I think a lot of times you have to take that shot at getting the next Mike Trout and putting that guy on your bench at least and having one shot at glory, if you want to say. You kind of want to play to win your local DC in NFBC. I think you want to win your local league, but you want to keep an eye on the prize. And I think that I always take a shot in AL Labor. I buy old, boring guys, and you and I talk all the time. How many times have I bought Eddie Rosario after talking to you about his projections? I think I might be done buying Eddie Rosario, but I think I might have also owned Eddie Rosario 3 years in a row at AL Labor.
Right.
and there's always like I bought Alex Gordon this last year in AL Labor. I didn't think that Alex Gordon would be amazing, but I thought he would just stand out there and play.
Right.
And I didn't spend that Alex Gordon pick on a prospect that never played or busted. But the Kyle Lewis thing still sticks with me, where it's like I still want to take a couple shots at glory. I want my team to be well balanced. I want my team to have stability. But I cannot resist. Chris Liss is a big fan of taking at least one big shot at glory and having a $4 or $5 prospect. Top 5 prospects, the bus rate is even smaller, and there's so many superstars that were top 5 prospects. So that's my only sort of retort, I guess.
Yeah, and Ruvain's big on that also. I know when we come to the end of a draft, Ruvain's always like, we got to get one prospect in there. Right?
Always. A couple of years ago in NFPC, when Trey Turner was coming up, I said we have to have him, even though I think we got him in the auction.
Snake.
I said in the Snake, we said we have to have him. We must have him because he's going to come up late in the season and he can put us over the top. We won our league, and I think we finished 9th overall because we had him also. Because he stole bases like crazy.
And especially, that's the other thing, dude. That is really important. Stolen bases come from young players. The aging curve on stolen bases is terrible. And I'm not saying that every prospect that comes up will still steal bases, but there's a relationship between youth and stability, right? And so you may have to take a shot on somebody that you think is a quality player because you need those stolen bases. You know what I mean? Like, especially in Dynasty, I always find myself with sort of like 80 stolen bases when I need 100. And I find that on almost every league, but it's especially true in Dynasty when I'm like trying to plug in Lorenzo Cain and be like, please just steal me 18 bases, please.
Right. Yeah, young players who have the starting job always a good pick. And I'll add that any of these, as long as it's sufficiently low enough that you're okay if you drop a guy, if it's not happening,
you can't fall in love. You can't fall in love.
And you can't fall in love, yeah. Let's pivot a bit to KDS, Kentucky Derby style preferences. I know, we've talked a little bit about this. Now, in a lot of leagues, where you pick in the Snake could be random, or maybe it's assigned by how you finished the previous year. But I know in the NFBC and some other leagues, you can select where your preference is to pick. Should you pick in the middle, early, on the wheel, or whatnot? There are advantages and disadvantages for each, but quickly, what is your preference and why?
Going into this, I wanted to pick very early or very late. I like the idea of having 2 choices to make, and maybe the ability to press the room and take 2 starting pitchers in a row, or deplete the closer rankings by taking 2 in a row. But I saw your research on this. And yours is sort of like the empirical research, which is that just traditionally teams in the middle have done better. And I started thinking about it, and there is the idea of around the horn is 2 picks in a row. However, there's a relationship there between picks and information gained. And when you have 2 picks in a row, there's no information gained between the 2 picks.
Right.
When you have picks that are very far apart, there's a lot of information gained in between. So if you have a pick in the middle, and then you can watch what's happening in the draft, then you can react to that and do something different. And I just think about there's always a run, and it's usually closer runs, and I'm usually trying to skimp on closers, and I've just gotten in trouble when I'm on the turns when I say, look, there's 4 or 5 good closers left. I will get one of those when we come back. And then there's a closer run, and I don't get any. But if you're in the middle, you can say, whoa, that closer run, was a lot more intense than I thought. Let me jump in the middle here and take a closer where I might have been taking a different position. So information gained increases near the middle, picking near the middle, I think.
Yeah, very well said. I agree with all those points. I mean, additionally, you have to reach for players if you're going to be at the wheel. If you are in the middle, there's at least a half round less of reach for players. So in terms of picking up value, you're basically gaining half a round of value almost every other turn by picking up in the middle. Now, interestingly, though, if you are trying to balance your categories or you're trying to balance your statistics, it's actually sometimes a little bit easier to do so at the wheel because you've got boom, boom. You can very carefully pick the two things that you need to bang up on. But again, I'm all about value, so for that reason, I think that the middle is superior. Ruvain,
But
anything
think
to
about
add?
your pitching strategy.
Yeah.
Think about
Mhm.
your pitching strategy. One thing
Yeah.
that could be you could be really strategic about is, in pitching strategy is if you are into a 2A strategy, it's a lot easier if you pick at the end.
Well,
Right.
you both stole my points. I mean, we were talking about
Sorry.
value and balance, and if you're by the wheel, you can get the balance, but you don't always get the value. Or you go the other way around, you get the value, but you don't get the balance. So being on the wheel, being even picks 1 through 5, I think are still on either side. I think 6 through 10 in a normal 15-team league, that's the sweet spot. I think that's where you can have the least amount of risk when it comes to value because you're going to get what you want. You're going to have the least amount of risk for balance because you can, like Eno said, you see everything that's going on. You have so much information, and as long as you're prepped, because if you're not ready, sometimes that middle comes really fast, and you have to be ready for that. When you're by the wheel, and you have some time. You have some time to think. You can plan out everything like that. You just have to be on your toes more and follow everything that's going on. Follow the other teams, what's going on also, if you're going to be in the middle rounds.
Yeah. So you mentioned, about the double A strategy where you pick two aces in the first 3 rounds, let's say. Are you into that? I know I had an article a year or so ago about that it's important to grab an ace, at least one, to anchor your rotation, that you shouldn't settle for a 1A or even less than that. You should always grab that top ace because it's a good investment. Where are you on that discussion of either single ace or double ace?
I tried the double A strategy the last couple of years in a few leagues at least, and I found that article very interesting. I've been playing since about 2001, and for the first 5 years of playing, I had a rule that I wouldn't pick a starting pitcher before the 10th round.
Wow.
And the reason it worked so well back then, I just think that we weren't that good at telling how good a pitcher was. That I could just basically use raw tools like strikeout rate and BABIP allowed, and between those two, be like, this guy is still an ace. He just had a bad year. And the way that the room picked back then was different. And so basically, I would pick like 3 or 4 pitchers from like round 9 until 12. And I'd get a bunch of guys that could jump into ace territory, and they would. But as the leagues have gotten better at evaluating pitching and then also have started to invest in pitching, the entire room moves up. The entire pitching population moves up. If you picked your first pitcher in the 9th or 10th round today, it'd be the equivalent of somebody else's 4th pitcher, probably. At least
Right.
3rd. And so now you're really falling behind because you're not picking out of that same group. You're not picking guys with the same amount of upside. You're picking a ton of risk. And so I've just slowly over the years, and like there's also this interesting thing. I forget what the name of it is, but there's this idea that if you think you have a strength, a lot of times you'll make your own strength into a weakness by over relying on your strength. So I've thought all along, I'm good at picking pitching. I don't have to invest as much in pitching. I don't have to take pitchers as high. I will find my pitchers. If you take that too far, what ends up happening is you shoot your own strength in the foot. What I should do is maybe not bid the most on pitching in a league, but bid equal to everybody else and have a bit of better pitching staff if I'm good. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so recently, I've begun to invest more. I think I'm stepping back away from. It still is just a very volatile position with more injuries and injuries that take longer to heal. And so I'm going to step back away from 2 aces, but I do want a top 10 pitcher, and then I kind of want a back end from the next 10. And then I'm going to start picking my guys already after that. When I started making my pitching ranks, I started realizing that the number of pitchers that I think I can depend on used to be 50, and then it was 30, and now I feel like it's 20. So,
Right.
You do kind of want as many as you can of the pitchers that you think you can depend on, that you feel good about. So that's
Right.
the 2A strategy. But there's questions. There's questions for pitchers starting at, like, think about Bauer, right? If you have Bauer as like your eighth pitcher or whatever, there are questions around Bauer. There's a fair amount of questions about Bauer. Just look at his track record. So if the questions start at 8 now, are you really going to take 2 aces?
Right. No, I'm with you, and I think the big thing about my research was less about the aces, and we can argue at what it was an ace. Is it top 4, top 7, top 8? This year maybe it's 7, but the big thing is that the whole middle is very unsuccessful. We're talking from pitcher 12 through like 40.
Mm-hmm.
That whole range is just a blur. Like the success rate is only about 20 to 30% from that. You're almost better off not paying that premium to go in that middle range. You're better off going to the bottom. But as you say, if you can't just wait because everybody's pitching up, everybody is pushing up pitching so much that you'll be completely depleted with pitching without taking an ace. So for that reason, you should take an ace and then maybe hold off a little bit in the middle and then do your shots later on.
Yeah, and try to. And if you are shopping in the middle, just hope that your ability to discern. The one thing also is that this ties into you're a very sort of projection based guy, and I am too. But projections are worse for pitchers.
Right.
And that's tied to your result as well.
Right. Correct. You're more sure of the hitting than the pitching if you're going based on projections. Let's start with you on this one, Ruvain. In terms of relievers. So we saw last year Devin Williams, he returned in an NFBC 5x5 setting $18 of auction value. Incredible. Matt Foster returned $10. Richard Rodriguez returned $7. Mike Mayers of the Angels returned $6. Darren O'Day, $6. There was tremendous value from middle relievers that was present. Question for you is, should you, knowing that you're going to have relievers ending up there, should you be drafting any relievers, and if so, how?
I think the answer is draft maybe, but roster yes. Last year there were 80 pitchers who threw, only 80 who threw 50 innings last year. Now, if let's say we have a full season and all the pitchers are good to go, some of these pitchers are going to be held back, which means there's going to be more innings for these middle relievers. 50 innings is what around what a reliever used to get, not a starting pitcher. So starting pitchers have to build up their strength, and a lot of these pitchers didn't pitch. If you're going to draft Marcus Stroman, if you're going to draft David Price, they didn't pitch at all last year. So what do you think their inning total? You think David Price was going to throw 200 innings? He will not throw 200 innings. You're going to have a lot more middle relievers there, so you're going to get more middle reliever guys who are going to get wins. You're going to get more middle relievers in the top echelon for strikeouts, just because there's going to just have so much. They're going to have so much more roles in this coming year. Also, I think they haven't announced about the DH yet in the National League, but I still think that because this season is, they're thinking about starting late and everything like that. If anything, I think there may still be another roster spot or two extra next year, just because they want to get an extra reliever there, because the pitchers, they don't have the arm strength. They're going to be, if they have to push their pitchers, they're going to be more injuries than there were, and I don't think the players union would want that. I think they'd want an extra roster spot so that each team can roster more relievers, and I think that makes the relievers more valuable because they're going to be pitching a lot more innings.
Yeah, these are great points. Last year we saw almost 3 times the pitching injuries of a regular season. And if you're doing the kind of analysis that you do, Ariel, you'll find that I've seen some best ball analysis, some other kinds of analysis where people are talking about winning teams drafted this much pitching, or their value came from pitching more than hitting. I think that's because there were so many injuries last year that if your pitching staff stayed in one piece, you won. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I think that the lesson for us is that there's going to be more injuries than a normal season next year. Maybe not as many as last season, but I think Ruven is totally right that there's going to be more injuries next year and more starting pitcher injuries. And I've been asking player development staff around the league, I've been asking coaches and farm directors, how are you going to decide how many innings that these guys can throw? We just had an article about this because of the lost minor league season with Britt Garoli and Melissa Lockhart on The Athletic, where we asked people, like, how are you going to decide these things? And one guy said, we used to do it where we just laid the stuff out and we looked at them, and if they looked like they were generally healthy, we added 10% in terms of innings, and we had no idea why we did it.
Right, right,
We
right,
just added
right.
10%. But you can't add 10% this year because what if the guy threw 60 innings last year? You're not going to have guys throwing 66 innings next year. That's not going to be enough. So we're
Right.
going to have guys who jump up in innings. We're going to have some guys who get injured, some guys who don't. We won't know what's going on. And I think those relievers will soak up a lot of that value. Plus, there's just the general trend in baseball towards bullpenning, towards taking the starter out in the fifth, like Snell in the World Series. So the more you do that, the more you have these guys. The one thing I will say though is I think Ruben is also right to say not to draft the guy because relievers year to year are super hard to project, and a middle reliever makes it even harder. And then second of all, just and I can ask you guys this just from running a bunch of teams like I did. Did you do you think that you had an idea about which types of relievers would have the most wins? I thought it'd be like Jonathan Loizaga types, but it ended up being, like your fourth setup guy. I don't know. There was no rhyme or reason for me in terms of relievers leading the league in wins. I didn't quite
Yeah.
see a rubric that I could follow. I don't know. Maybe you guys spotted something.
No, I haven't for relievers for wins. I take reliever. I like to take a middle reliever as my last bench spot. I wouldn't draft a middle reliever, only for your last bench spot or an early season pickup off the waivers. The reason why I like to have one is because I would rather go early in the season instead of having 7 starting pitchers. I'll throw in an extra middle reliever so that my ERA and WHIP ratios are a little bit padded, especially when you
Safer.
don't know. Yeah, you don't know how starters are going to be in a season, so I'll be a little bit safer earlier on, and you can always make up some extra strikeouts and wins later on by putting extra starters later on when you know which teams are good, and I know I can pitch against the Marlins and or whoever what you want to do. So that's how I use them, but I wouldn't spend any draft capital, and wins are just too fishy in total to even look at.
If you think about it, it can take up to 10 days to know even what your starting pitcher's velocity is, right? It might
Right,
take
right.
2 starts to know if the guy is really up or down in velocity. You might know on the second day of the season if your reliever is up or down in velocity. So early on last season, we knew Hansel Robles was a problem. We probably knew it in the spring. We knew it, from his first appearance. But when it came to other starting pitchers, if they were up or down, we kind of had to wait a little bit. And sometimes it's better to wait with that guy on your bench.
Correct, correct. Question, we've been drafting in leagues, we as a community, closers pretty early. I mean, I remember even just a year or two ago, 5th round, 6th round, there's a closer run. And we've all seen, especially this year, that closers are not a great investment, especially looking at the Tampa Bay Rays. I mean, I don't think I would even want to draft a single Ray this year. Who knows how many they're going to get. Do you think that as a community we should still be drafting closers this early on?
It's just been a problem for me, all the way through. I've just never really been able to align closer value with the values of my spreadsheet. I've always had to pump up a number or two. Recently in AL Labor, I have bought, in the last 2 years, I bought Aroldis Chapman and Liam Hendricks at the top of the market, sort of $18, $19. And they've been worth the investment. But I can't think that, it's a little bit like the starting pitcher thing. You couldn't convince me to buy an ace closer, a top 5 closer. You can convince me that's worth it. But even now, at the top of the closer market now, Aroldis Chapman is getting older. That fastball velocity is just sort of inching towards a place where I might think it's a little bit down, and then I just could see him kind of falling apart at one year. Liam Hendricks came out of nowhere and could go back to nowhere. I feel like, so I just think generally I really pick my spots with closers. And for the most part, I think there's something like 60% of the saves in a given season are on the wire.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'd rather get those. The problem with the wire, though, too, is do you go full FAB early on a guy and think I'm going to win this guy and he's going to be the closer? Or do you do a lot of sort of mid FAB bets and be like, I'm gonna just spend a little bit here and here and here and here and hope that one of these guys ends up being the closer, because there's the FAB strategy to think about too. You could spend all your money on saves and still end up mid-table in saves. So you don't necessarily want to spend all of your FAB chasing saves.
Right. I mean, the short answer is that it really doesn't matter what we think is correct. We know it's not true that closers are fickle, but you still need saves as a category, and if everybody is buying them early, there's what I call a market premium for it. Right,
Yeah.
Saves you're pay at an auction. You're going to pay $10 at least for some top closer. So since everybody's paying it, it's okay to pay it. Right, it's just it's the cost of doing business. It's somewhat similar to catchers, right? Just to get a top catcher. Steal,
Right.
same thing. You're paying
Yeah.
a premium just for that stat or category or position. So in that sense, it's okay to pay that. Now, you don't want to be far ahead of the pack. You don't want to have a closer and pick him in the 4th round and find out everybody's picking the rest in the 7th. That would be you're paying too much of a market premium. But if the first couple closers are going in the 4th and you're able to get a mid-level closer all the way in the 8th, you're not paying as much of a market premium as everybody else, and then you're going to be in a better position for doing that. But I will say though that Fab closers have been a decent investment on the waiver wire. If you look at the return on investment for closers by spending somewhere between 5 and 10% of your Fab budget, it's actually turned out pretty good. So you need to have some balance. And the last thing I'll say is that closers to me are quantity over quality. You're not buying them for you're not really buying them for the ratios, although they help. You're buying them for the save category. So I'd rather
It's one
take
category
darts.
buy,
Yeah, just take darts at 3-4 closers at the end for a couple of dollars instead of spending something at the top. Hope that 2 stick, and then pick up one on the waiver wire. That's how I would do that. Ruvain, anything to add?
Yeah, there's actually something a little bit different that I'm going to put in. I like closers or relievers who have a high strikeout rate and with a job insurance. Last year, the top 4 closers with the most strikeouts, you had Trevor Rosenthal had 11 saves with 38 strikeouts. Liam Hendricks had 37 strikeouts with 14 saves. Kenley Jansen had 33 strikeouts with 11 saves. And Edwin Diaz, 6 saves, but he had 50 strikeouts. 50. All right? That was more far and away than anyone else. Josh Hader had 13 saves with only 31 strikeouts. So if you're going to draft high, I would say the one target you should be looking for is someone who has a high strikeout like Diaz, because you may get something else out of him as well. Otherwise, Trevor Rosenthal was near the top of the league in saves, so you can get them like you guys said on the waiver wire. But if you really really are desperate and you want to make sure you get a closer, you have to look for job assurance, look for a high strikeout rate, and I see only one player that fits that right now.
Chapman?
No, Edwin Diaz.
Diaz.
Oh, yeah.
Diaz, he led all relievers in strikeouts last year.
Chapman's still there, but it's every injury and every tiny bit of fastball tick. Derek Carty did a lot of research on this. I tried to follow that research in terms of what predicts closer change, and you're totally right. It's strikeout rate, usage. Usage is number one. So if you're looking at FAB, who pitched the 8th, that's actually number one. But if you want to look at something beyond that, if a couple guys pitched the 8th, then the other thing is fastball velocity and strikeout rate. So it follows actually from that before the season, you should be looking at fastball velocity and strikeout rate. There was a finding back in the day that lefties were closers less often than you'd expect, but I think that might be changing because of the three batter rule, because you don't see as many Oliver Perez lefty only types. So if you have a lefty, he's likely to be good against both hands, and he can just be a closer. You know what I mean? And you're not saving a lefty for one batter anymore. So you don't need to worry if your closer's a lefty or righty as much, I don't think. So I'm not sure if that's still true anymore, but I think it's still true that velocity and strikeout rate are what you're looking for in a closer.
Exactly.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the ATC projections and some other projections. We have a mailbag question from Wint, who asks, what are the best projections to use? And I know you mentioned both ATC and the BAT. Maybe you can talk a little bit about especially the BAT and a little bit about ATC, and I'll interject as well.
I like them both. One of the things that is really cool about ATC is that it's a meta projection. And so it's going to look at all the other projections, see what they do well, and kind of pull from the correct projection at the right time, in essence, by saying, okay, well, this one does this well, and this one does this well. So I'm going to weight, Steamer for this and Zips for that or whatever. And that's a smart thing to do. And I think the one thing that I really respect Derek Carty as an analyst as well, because he kind of in essence made his own projection system, the BAT, a meta projection system by creating the BAT X, which is a StatCast based projection system. And then he kind of looked at his two projection systems and said, almost like a meta projection system again, where he said, which of these two does better, in this situation, this over this type of, on this stat and this stat. So when he releases the BAT projections in the end, it basically is a meta projection system of its own. And in general, what I like about both systems is they're two of the best at, because you're weighting things by system. They're the two best at incorporating StatCast stats. That's the best new stats. They're stabilized the quickest. We're coming off of a short season, and knowing that something like barrel rate stabilizes pretty quickly, max exit velocity, stuff like that stabilizes quickly, that's going to make your projection system better. So that's why I respect both of those projection systems. That's why I use both of them.
Yeah. And I just had an article come out today or yesterday on Fangraphs that took a little bit of a deeper dive into how the BAT X improved from the BAT, from Derek Carty's model. You can actually see which players that it really went up or went down and why, and it gives you a little bit of a clue into the BAT X. And the BAT X actually just edged out ATC for the best projections of 2020. Let's say you're using auction dollars. You've got 260 auction dollars, while most projections will, in a fantasy sense, will get you to draft $260 for $260 of auction value. ATC returned about $280. The BAT X went a little bit more and returned $290. So good to use from a fantasy baseball sense to create excess value.
And it's going to be really important coming off of this short season, I think, to get the right projection system.
Absolutely. And I was surprised that ATC did so well in the short season, because the whole theory about ATC is that, it's great in the long run. It's great in the average. So you would generally want to see a full 162 games to make sure that ATC comes out the best. But it actually did very well even in the short season, which really gives me a lot of confidence, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if it's gonna pull the best aspects of every projection system out there, it's probably pulling the most not reactive, that sounds bad, but like the most sensitive parts of those projections, right? The ones that are capturing the most signal. So in some essence, it's maybe less surprising.
Yeah. And the best part of ATC is not just the buy signal, but the pass signal. So a lot of times when you look at projections, there's a player that, oh, wow, it looks really great. You got to buy it. It's so much value based on the numbers. But on the other end, you'll go away from bad decisions. Oh, Garrett Hampson. I know that's the one player that I know so many people fell into that trap. Oh, he's enticing. And ATC always showed a strong pass. You'll get more of those passes correct on ATC than anything else. And these days in playing fantasy baseball, it's more about not losing value than even gaining value, which really helps. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not blowing the big bucks is as big as finding the value is, sure.
Yeah. On to Command Plus. I know that you use this in a lot of articles that you write and in your fantasy evaluations and so on and so forth. Can you just take a minute or so and explain to everyone what Command Plus is and maybe how to use it in uncovering some undervalued pitchers?
Yeah, one of the things that's cool about Command Plus is that it's pretty reactive, it returns some signal very early on, and the reason it does is that it asks. The question that Command Plus asks is the pitcher doing what he wants to with the ball, which is very different than zone rate or corner, how much does he hit the corners of the strike zone, or walk rate. those things are dependent on the umpire. They're dependent very much so on pitch type and the hitter, the hitter that they're facing. If you think about it, pitching low and in to the corner is not always a good idea. There are hitters that can then smack the crap out of that ball. So low and in is good to one guy and not good to another. And so Command Plus asks a little bit tougher of a question, which is just who is good at these at like putting the ball where he wants to. And I've actually found, I've been trying to use it for a couple of years. To me, I'm trying to pull apart stuff and command. I've seen enough of what teams do internally. I've worked with future and former analysts for teams, so I know that this is what teams are doing. That they're trying to boil pitchers down to a stuff and command number so that they can pull away all the noise that comes with balls in play and umpires and versus hitters and this and that. Especially after a season in which the NL Central only, played Central teams. I think it's really important to kind of try and strip away a lot of that noise. But what I've found over the years is that it's almost best at telling me who to avoid. It's kind of funny. It's coming off that ATC comment.
Yeah.
Yeah. It may not always be obvious when someone has reliever level command. And I'm thinking about someone like Josh James going into last season. As a reliever, it looked like he had 4 pitches, the kind of stuff that you could totally believe in. And yeah, maybe his command wasn't great, but his stuff was going to be so outstanding that when he got the chance to be a starter, a lot of people spent a lot of money on him. But by Command Plus, he had an 86 or an 84, I think, which is just really, really low. And by the time you get down to the mid 80s, it's all relievers. Josh James this past season had an 86. Around him is John Gant, Trevor Gott, Edwin Diaz, Gregory Soto. They're fine relievers, but there's a reason they're relievers. And what I found was I tried to use command and stuff to predict innings pitched per appearance. And what I found was there's a shelf. And you really want to have above a 90 Command Plus to be a starting pitcher. So that's relevant for a few players. You see sub 90 Command Plus on, let's see here. I'm just going through. Luis Patino had a 86 last year. Who's another one? Tyler Glasnow had an 87, and he only has 2 pitches. I think that factors in. Michael Lorenzen had an 86. Denilson Lamet had an 86 and only had 2 pitches. Dylan Cease last year, who had I think he had the worst strikeout minus walk total in baseball, which is another really strong tool, a really strong statistical tool. You pair the bad K minus BB and the 85 Command Plus, and I've been a guy who said Dylan Cease has great stuff. I believe in him. I'm all in on Dylan Cease. At this point, I'm not buying at his price. It has to be super, super cheap for me to buy in, and that's because of the command that he's showing. So, I kind of use it on the edges. I'm a little bit more stuff forward, but I want to see some representative command. And when you have plus stuff and plus command, then you are Jake DeGrom. He is. On that list, yeah. And you are Brandon Woodruff, and the very best have plus stuff and plus command.
Right. Obviously, getting both. Question for Ruvain here. I know that playing with you, we're big on trying to even draft pitcher ratios, ERA whip. Can you draft ERA whip versus drafting counting stats? Is that a thing? I'm thinking of players like Zach Greinke, Kyle Hendricks that are always fantastic in ERA whip. Hendricks even more so, where he doesn't have a tremendous strikeout ability. Can you do that?
You can if you decide you want to do if you get the good ratio guys, you can do 2-star pitchers and get all the strikeout rates, get all the strikeouts later in the season. You don't necessarily need to worry about blowing up your ERA and WHIP if you have those ERA stabilizers like a Kyle Hendricks, like a Zach Greinke. Now, Zach Greinke back in the day had ERA, he had WHIP, and he was also striking out 200 people. So he had it all going on at one point, even with the decrease in velocity, which he seems to have every spring. But as long as you're able to have those base guys who are able to balance your team with ERA and WHIP, then you should be okay. That's where these middle relievers come in, because a lot of these middle relievers, their ERA and WHIP will be lower than the starters, and that's where you can actually make up the counting stats with both the middle relievers a little bit nowadays with the wins and the strikeouts, but you can also get those 2-star pitchers and not have to worry about blowing up your ERA and WHIP for the entire season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in love with guys like Kyle Hendricks, who just have a fantastically stable ERA. You know, his highest ERA in the last 5 seasons, Hendricks, 3.46. I mean, he, in terms of NFBC roto value, he hasn't had less than a $12 value for a year in the last couple of years. He's even had a plus $20 value a couple of times. So you're not getting that strikeouts, but you're getting that such stability. And the greatest thing about Hendricks is that he goes deep into games. Over his career, he's averaged over 6 innings per game started. This year, he averaged over 6 2/3 innings. When you're looking especially for pitchers who are going to accumulate the wins, which is not a category that it's very easily to pick from, you really want to concentrate on players who go deep into games and who are on good teams.
Guess who goes deep into games? Guys with a high command plus and a lot of pitches. Here are guys that have multiple pitches and good command plus, and you'll see that it's not as dependent on velocity, I think. Zach Gallen, Masahiro Tanaka, Aaron Nola, Chris Paddock didn't have a great season, but I'm going to bet on him again because I see that command plus. Tyler Mahle is another guy I'll bet on because I see command plus and an out pitch and many pitches. But Hyun-Jin Ryu's up there, Kyle Hendricks, Jacob deGrom. Marco Gonzalez led the league in decisions the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons he can do that is he has enough pitches and enough command to go into the game. Dallas Keuchel is throwing 89 miles an hour. He's in the top 25 in command plus, and that's part of why. Another buy that I have based on command plus is Luke Weaver. Multiple pitches, good command, hopefully good health coming back this year. Definitely a low price tag.
Yeah, and speaking about Marco Gonzalez, I do think there's some regression for him this year, but I'm very high on him. I have a statistic that I've created called WPDI, which is somewhat similar to CSW, but it looks at whether pitchers are getting deceptive swings inside or outside the zone. Marco Gonzalez is one of the highest pitchers in getting swing and misses outside of the zone. So even though he's throwing much softer stuff than a lot of people, he's very deceptive, and he's getting people to just chase at stuff. That's one of the reasons why he's really propped up and is able to go deep into games and strike out more batters than he should.
Yeah.
Let's do one mailbag question here. Here's a fun one here from Zach, and he says, Ariel, you score every softball game that you play in. Do you account for reaching on errors in your rate stats? I assume that there are a lot of errors in B-League rec baseball. So I play in, I guess you call it B-League, recreational softball. It's not high arc, it's modified, so we're talking, you're throwing the ball hard, it's strikeouts, and I am a pitcher, so I do play that. So my answer to you is I actually do account for reach on errors. And
of course you do. You want ERAs. You want to lower your ERA.
Well, I don't account for it on the pitching side because that would destroy my ERA. Here's what I do on the hitting side, though. I attribute this to Bill James. Bill James has a very good statistic called runs created. Where if you take the total bases times the OBP, or in long form, at-bats times slugging times OBP, you'll actually get roughly the number of runs that a team scores. If you look at that and compare that formula to what you actually get in B-League baseball, you get a lot more runs in actuality. And the reason, of course, most of it has to do with
contact rate.
The errors, the errors that come on.
But also contact rate. Teams that put the ball in play are better.
Right, right. But a lot of that, in terms of the statistics, comes from errors where people are beating it out or whatnot. But anyways, I found out that if you consider a reached on error to be a half of a base, so if you give for slugging, if you're giving a single is 1 and a double is 2, a triple is 3, if you count a reached on error as a half, that actually is very close to the ballast that will make Bill James's formula close to reality. So I count in my league a reach on error as a half a base.
There you go.
Now, when are these players drafted in fantasy leagues? That's what I really want.
I do have a fantasy league where I'm allowed to draft anybody anywhere. There's no rules on the player universe, so maybe I'll draft you.
Well, I'm a contact hitter, high OBP, not a lot of power. So if that plays well,
Well, it's an OBP league, so here you go.
There you go.
You can draft Manny Ramirez. Manny Ramirez is playing in Australia, so I guess you can draft him, can't you?
Yeah. Although he's injured, I think. Which brings us to Ruvain's injury report. Ruvain, who do you got for us?
Okay, so what I'm going to do for the first couple episodes this year is I'm going to go over some injuries that are repeat players who had surgery at the end of the year and recovering, and I'm also going to throw in a trickle of other injuries that are occurring real time. So I'm going to start with Paul Goldschmidt. Goldschmidt underwent a procedure to remove a bone spur from his right elbow when the season ended. He was dealing with a chronic elbow issue throughout the entire of last season. He's expected to be ready when 2021 starts. Eno, you mentioned Josh James. He had hip surgery to repair a labral tear when the season ended. He's supposed to be out 6 to 8 months. Late April or early May, probably the earliest recovery time. Zach Wheeler figured out how to put on his pants and had successful right middle fingernail resection procedure performed in October. He's expected to be ready in spring training.
That thing was gross.
Yeah. It's really crazy. Luis Perdomo. He underwent Tommy John surgery in October. He is going to miss the 2021 season. Luis Severino. Severino's rehab is supposedly going well, and he could return to the Yankees sometime June or July. Brandon Belt. He underwent surgery to have a bone spur removed from his right heel mid-October. There was no timeline for his recovery, but he should be good for the season starting. Mike Clevenger. Padres GM AJ Preller said that he doesn't expect Clevenger to require off-season surgery, but he was dealing with elbow and bicep issue and a drop in velocity, so that's something just to watch. Nick Madrigal had left shoulder surgery mid-October. He is expected to require 5 to 6 months to recover, so he may not be ready for the beginning of the season. Nelson Lamet, another guy you mentioned, A.J. Preller also said that he isn't expected to require off-season surgery. He had a PRP injection performed, and he seems to be responding well to that. Luke Voigt, he was diagnosed with plantar fasciitis and required a PRP injection as well. That's an injury that could linger, and you saw it linger, and you saw it zap his power during the playoffs. That's something to watch. Now, 2 players who were actually injured in the Dominican League this offseason, Juan DeFranco. He was diagnosed with biceps inflammation and shoulder soreness. He was playing in the Dominican League, and then he got an injury, and then they decided to shut him down. Another prospect, Julio Rodriguez. He began having quad discomfort in the Dominican League, and then they shut him down.
Good stuff there, Ruvain. And you'll hear Ruvain all off season and all season long, giving you the injury updates with some fantasy relevance as well. Thank you so much for being on the show. Our very first Beat the Shift podcast on Fangraphs. Why don't you tell us where everyone can read your work and listen to you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at ENOSARRIS and over at The Athletic. If you follow my Rates and Barrels podcast, which you can actually listen to free on Apple if you want to take us for a free ride at first, I think that's the best deal, and people don't always know about it. I think the best deal is if you follow the podcast and try to sign up for The Athletic from there. I can't speak exactly what it is right now, but it's the best deal that I know of is usually through the podcast. So check the Rates and Barrels page and see what the deal is from there. That's the best deal that I can think of. And the most recent piece that I had that's worth shaking a fist at, hopefully, is I wrote about popularity of players and how, the relationship between the quality of a player and the popularity of a player on Fangraphs. And I think there might be some fantasy applications to this, because, and it's actually kind of funny, it's the kind of player that I think ATC would love. A guy like Anthony Rendon and Alex Bregman, two players that are projected to be good players next year, got way fewer hits on their player pages than you'd expect, just given the relationship between player quality and popularity on Fangraphs. And I think there is a sort of a niche of player that's sort of between 27 and 30 that hasn't changed teams recently. I mean, I know Rendon has, but they're, if they haven't been transacted recently, and they are not Mike Trout, Mookie Betts level, that sort of good but not great 28-year-old, those players might be undervalued. People will be reaching for Fernando Tatis when there are Alex Bregman types going much later or for much cheaper. So there was something there, I think, for fantasy players, and we talked about it on the podcast, and I had a piece where I sort of graphed player quality by popularity and tried to talk about the reasons for it. It also, there's some stuff there about markets. I think Yankee players, Dodger players sometimes will get bid up a little bit, and you'll find some value on the Oakland Athletics and the Tampa Bay Rays of the world.
Really good stuff, and everyone here should be following Eno and reading his work on The Athletic and listening to the absolutely fantastic Rates and Barrels podcast that he does with Derek Van Riper and Britt Giroli. Ruvain, how about you?
You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out updates of injuries, whether they had surgery in the off-season. Also, during the season, I do that as well. I also have a weekly in-season article on Rotoballer discussing the injuries as well.
And my name is Ariel Cohen. You can read my work at Fangraphs, at CBS Sportsline, and at Rotoballer. And you can find the ATC projections, which will come out in mid-January over at Fangraphs. Follow me on Twitter at ATCNY. Thank you so much, Eno, for coming on the show. Really appreciate it on our first ever episode here of Beat the Shift on Fangraphs. And from all of us, see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.